guys, and welcome back to another episode of your Brains Coach podcast. My name is Angela Sharina. I'm your host. I'm your Brains Coach, and just someone with a lot of passion and obsession for helping you guys to learn, to discover, to apply all the brain tools of the brain body tools to feel, look, and do your absolute best. Guys, I'm just so excited about today because we have a guest on this episode that we had a very productive and insightful conversation about something that we're all living through. This new world of remote and distributed and work at home work that we are facing. There is so much about it that we don't quite understand, that we didn't quite figure out. And with Jesse McGinnis, who works as a leader of engineers at Shopify, we're going to talk about the best practices to build deeper connections, to build trust you so often hear about, to help leaders to facilitate true, full human-based connections that will unlock people's productivity, motivations, and innovations, and in general will help us to build not just the better world of work, but just better world overall. Because, guys, I'm a huge believer in the fact that how we do anything is how we do everything. And so if we learn how to build better, deeper connections at work, where we spend majority of our active time, then we'll be able to build those deeper connections in all the other interactions. So with Jesse, we're going to talk a lot about focus on intentionality, how a remote setting can actually help us to do better when it comes to being more intentional about what we want to create and how we can use environment and different settings to create that exact result that we are looking for, whether that's, building trust or building better interactions for our workflow. We talk a lot about the culture of trust and high performance, but not so much about the concept, but how you actually do that, how you actually build deeper connections so people trust each other. What kind of tools are available, from different questions and different question and game based interactions to different setups in our digital environment. And we have such a variety of different tools to create different environments in our digital world. We talk with Jesse a lot about leadership and different concepts. For example, how leaders can get in their own way, trying to facilitate trust, openness, and vulnerability, and how to avoid this through simple practice, trust first. We're going to talk about how to actually do that. In his work, Jesse mentions how to build different layers of deeper connection, different communication, how there are different layers of trust building and where to start, and how to move from more like shallow connections that are also necessary to deeper, full human connections. Jesse talks about this concept of fun, real talk, and full human connection. We also talk about how getting to know full person, why building deeper connections with your coworkers, why is it so important for people's productivity and to be able to motivate your teams and your people, and also to create the environment of innovation. Like, a lot of leaders talk about exponential technology and innovation, but in order for that to thrive in any company, you actually have to build trust first. So again, back to trust. How do you actually do that in the remote setting? Jesse works at Shopify, as I mentioned, and so we also talk about the best tools and practices of interaction that they found work for digital environments, and also what's up with, meeting cancellations, and do they actually still have meetings at Shopify, or it's all asynchronous? So we're going to talk about specific tools they use and specific frameworks that they found useful in the environment of remote and distributed work of a tech company. We also talk about New Year's resolutions and intentionality in terms not just practical and useful for work, but also for our personal development and our personal lives, our lives as a full human beings. So stay tuned till the end for that as well. And of course, don't forget at the end of this amazing, full of insights and just fun conversation, don't forget at the end of it to connect with Jesse, and all the links and the ways you can connect with Jesse and his work are linked in the show notes. And of course, where you find this podcast, please, guys, start interacting with us, with me, with Jesse, and with each other to start those more meaningful conversations that will learning how to build deeper connections and to understand this new world of work and life better. So start meaningful conversations, because the better we are at building this deeper connections on a personal and professional level, the better not just the world of work we create, but also a better world in general for any of our human interactions we create. Again, back to the idea, how we do anything is how we do everything. So start meaningful conversation on any social media where you found this podcast. Also, if you happen to be on Apple or Spotify, anywhere, please leave us comments and rate us and leave any feedback that you have. And guys, I'm looking forward to hearing from you, engaging in meaningful, deep, full human conversations. And without further ado, please stay tuned for this insightful conversation with Jesse McGinnis from Shopify.
I've always been a person who is deeply against remote work, actually. Like the book that I co-authored a number of years ago really focused on like how important it was to be in person, to do your best work. And I think something that was kind of like a lesson that was forced to be gained by going remote while the whole world went remote was just like the realization that you can make it work in really, really positive ways. And it's about trade-offs. And I think there are moments and types of work where you still need to get back together. You still need to be in person. And there might be certain company setups or certain projects you're doing where you need to be together the entire time. But I think a lot of stuff, you can just have moments of like really intentional togetherness. And then with the right practices in remote, you can recreate a lot of the best things about that, like human trust, human connection piece, and get the benefits of living where you want, having a lifestyle that you appreciate, having the flexibility to move into different zones, a much wider hiring pool, so you're not constrained to your company center, and kind of let people build more balanced and harmonious lives, which to me is just, there's a lot that I think I'm willing to give up to unlock that for people.
Jesse McGinnis, welcome to your Brains Coach podcast. I'm so very happy, excited, pumped to have you on the show to talk about this very important topic in our new world, not just work, but just new world in general, right? And our listeners will soon understand what exactly we are talking about. But before we jump into our conversation, can you tell our listeners a couple of sentences or a couple of thoughts about yourself, what you do in the world, what you're passionate about?
Yeah. So I'm Jesse McGinnis. I've been in software companies for a while now. Started really my career in very small, went through an acquisition into Shopify, which has then become very big and has been an interesting contrast. And I think where I'm at right now, like I still love the craft of software building, but I've kind of transitioned to really loving the craft of helping people be their best, helping teams be their very best, helping people figure out how to show up and lead their teams in the best way. And I just find it really deeply satisfying and fulfilling to help people realize what they're capable of and achieve that. Yeah, it's fun. And we'll see what comes next. I don't know. It's still a journey, still figuring out lots of stuff on my own and for my own experiences, but there's something deeply satisfying about helping people figure out what they're capable of.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. I'm all about human potential, and I'm just since I was a kid, I'm like, how can I help? How can I figure out how to be my best myself, and then also help other people? I'm kind of like believe in superheroes that we all can be. That's the mission of my life.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think people so often discount what they're capable of and what they bring to the table. And like, I think I myself included, I know I've fallen into that trap, but yeah, there's so much potential.
Yes. And, you talk these days a lot about connections between people and building culture of trust in companies. And you believe, and I do too, that when we are in an environment of trust, people that we connect with, people that we love, people we share a lot in common with, that we can really flourish. Compare that to if you just by yourself or feel like you are alienated in your environment, or you don't trust people, or people don't trust you. So if people, if our listeners haven't guessed yet, we today are talking about building culture of trust, then high performance in companies, and specifically in today's new world of work, remote, distributed, whatever you call it. And Jesse, you put out there quite, some body of work, articles, there are books, and there are pieces of content here and there that I also read or hear about you. So let's just jump right into this. How do we build this culture of trust, especially in the remote setting, right? You mentioned you worked, as probably most of us, in a non-remote setting, and now in remote. What are, the key points that you're working on in this new setting, and how you do it?
Yeah, I mean, and there's so many ways to approach it, but I think to me, it really does come down to focusing on like human trust first, right? So I think there is different kinds of trust that emerge, particularly in the context of work, where there is a difference between like you and me trusting each other as humans versus us trusting each other as coworkers or in a team environment. And I think starting with that human relationship piece as an initial focus gives you a much more stable base to build other kinds of trust on top of. And I think you can build trust in one-on-one scenarios with a lot of very different tactics, time together, working through conversations, being open and honest and vulnerable, which particularly as a leader, you have a lot more opportunity to create that space that shows vulnerability is okay. But when it comes to teams, I think there's some, you can take a few different tactics to kind of accelerate that. And I think my most recent shtick has been focused on this idea of like, you have to kind of layer on increasing amounts of, I would say, almost intensity and vulnerability. And to some extent, really the big change with digital from in person is just a focus and intention, right? In office, a lot of these things you still needed to do, but if you didn't do them, they would probably happen naturally because people were sitting in the same room and hanging out at lunch. And they would have these kinds of conversations that find common ground, find initial connection, have social hangouts that build that first layer of trust, get out of a meeting where people were upset and rant together and maybe expose a story about something in their past. All of that kind of just came for free, and you could accelerate it with a lot of intention. But if you did nothing, you still got some of it. Whereas in our digital world, I think the thing that has happened is that basically almost none of this comes for free. There's a lot of stuff that you have to go and make intentional space and opportunity for people to do. And so when I think about digital worlds, start with that fun, start with the casual stuff, basically create room for small talk. And again, because camera environments can be awkward, especially if you have a large group, you need to have pair it with an activity that's lightweight, that lets people have something to do and not just be staring at each other awkwardly in silence, but creates that softens the friction to have casual conversation about different things. And yeah.
No, it just, in a lot of your content, you focus a lot on this word intentionality, and how in the digital world, especially, it's so very important to be very direct with the intention. Can you maybe expand more of that? How can people, companies, team leaders can bring this intentionality into conversations, into meetings, to set up the stage and make the conversations, the interactions flow into the direction that they want them to go?
Yep. Yeah. I think, well, so I mean, first step is know what you want to achieve, which is actually can be a really hard step to reach. And then be very explicit about your intentions. So don't assume that people know what you're trying to do, right? If you set up a social fun thing, don't just set up the fun thing. Talk about, I'm setting this up because I think it's really important that we get together and have times to just be chill or be human together, because we don't have that anymore. I'm setting up this time to have deep conversations so that we can get to know who we are, the depth of the humans that we work with, because again, it's so hard to have those opportunities to connect in a deep way in this digital world, right? I'm going to set up this time to share some really scary things or some really deep backstories. And just basically, it's always unveil the curtain, right? Sometimes I think people get caught in this trap of oh, I need to manage everything secretly and position people in ways that they don't know so that the right thing happens. And it's no, don't worry about it. You have smart, capable, beautiful humans with you. Trust them. I mean, that's the thing, right? You're trying to build trust. You have to trust them first if you're ever going to build trust, and talk about what you're trying to achieve. Be very explicit about it. They might surprise you with an idea of a better way to approach it or something that they've done. And then move into the exercise, the activity, the thing that you've set up. I think also on that point, when you're talking about intentionality, describe how you're going to do it, right? So whether you use an agenda, whether you have a slide deck, whether you have a standing process that you've described in advance, but be upfront about what you're trying to do, the steps or process you're going to take to get there, and then run through it. And then, of course, when you go into the actual activities themselves, you have to be aware of what kind of environment as a facilitator or leader you need to create for that space to be able to do the things that you want. And so certain kinds of activities are going to require different kinds of facilitation, ground rule setting, interaction patterns that you have to bring to the table.
Thank you for this in-depth explanation. And I think what I'm hearing is that in the remote setting, we just have to be we just have to do a lot more explaining, right? Because when we are in person, it's our energy, the way we move, how we, the space is designed, it tells a story. And when we're in the remote setting, there's very little.
These little boxes.
To tell what it's for, what we're about to do. And even, such a simple thing as how the other person feels. It's much harder to just guess, and absorb and feel the other person's state when we are communicating through technology than when, in person.
And I mean, I would add to that too, is I think all of this stuff you should do in person as well. We just don't. We don't have a habit of being explicit in person. And it goes better if you are. It's just that now in the digital world, as you've said it, because you don't have all of those soft signals, those emotional cues, those physical cues, the spatial cues, you have to say it. But it doesn't mean that it's in person means you shouldn't. You can just kind of get away without saying it, even though it would go so much better and more effectively if you did.
Yes. And I think, in general, if we're more open about what's on our mind, what we mean, what we are about to do, what results we're seeking in real life, if we are more like that just saves so much time and trouble in this, misunderstanding. But especially in the remote setting. Today I was checking out social media of a friend of mine, right? And we're kind of also collaborating on projects. And he put out some post about how as a creator, you don't need to learn, just put out content. And I misread it completely different way. And we almost, if we didn't know each other well, started a fight, right? And that's because there is no context and the brain just puts together the pieces in the way that just comes first. And that's kind of, I think, also happens, when we're just trying to facilitate any sort of like interaction online or in person. If we're not open, direct about all of these details, that it can go in so many different ways, not necessarily in the way we intended.
Yeah. And I think some of this, it gets back to some extent, the vulnerability point, where I think sometimes, as leaders or a facilitator or a person who's in charge of something, like you can create this, you can end up in this place where you feel like, oh, I need to know everything, or I need to be the expert. I need to be the best at what this is. And it's not okay for me to say that this is what I'm trying to do, because if I do it well, you'll know. And me saying that I'm trying to do this is admitting that I'm not going to be successful, or I think something's going to go awry. And to some extent, like, we shouldn't think that way, right? Like people are unaccommodating and understanding. And I think there's actually, I don't have a direct reference, but I have read a lot of things about how people open up when you are honest and vulnerable about what you're trying to achieve and where you're at. But I think it's like really leaning a bit into being vulnerable, which also helps establish the stage that like, hey, today I'm going to try something that I've never done before, but I've read this great post about how it can really endear trust. And you know what? We're going to see how this goes together. And it's like that little moment of vulnerability, that you're doing something new, something you haven't done before, but it has this intention. Like, as you said, like, it clears the air. Why am I doing this? Why are we all in a room asking these weird questions to each other? It's like, oh, he read this thing. And like, maybe I don't agree, but at least now I know why we're together and what we're trying to achieve. The fact that you are willing to be upfront that like, this is something new to me, like that might make people more forgiving in how they participate with your facilitation or the way that you show up. And it also, again, is that first door open to be honest and authentic.
And also, I think very important aspect of that, and you probably mentioned it, is that it helps other people to be vulnerable as well. And I think you wrote it in your last post on trust, that this vulnerability helps other people to express their opinions that might be unpopular or they're not sure of, right? And that also helps then in work scenarios people to innovate better, right? And be okay with like failing. It goes in like so deep, I believe. I really love that, post on the trust first. And in that post, you mentioned kind of 3 layers of building trust, or maybe 3 parts, and fun, real talk, and full human, right? Could you expand a little bit on that? And also, if you have specific tools, like maybe games or certain, articles and concepts that you'd like listeners to look up, and I can link it then please do share them as well.
For sure. Yeah. So the quick summary of is like, it's really what it's about is layering intensity and vulnerability. Is actually what we're trying to achieve. And so I'm trying to make it an easy approach with the 3 layers. It's as many layers as you need based on the current state of your team. But start with something social, something lightweight, really facilitating the fun, the small talk, the social connection, the things that would have happened in the lunchroom beforehand, or, end of day where you all stay back and play a board game, or hang out with like whatever, go bowling, something like that. And so there is tons of activities available to us in the digital world to do these things. Discord now has a whole bunch of games built in for you. There's like a dozen different games that have been converted to online versions. I can find a list to send if you want to like put in like notes or something somewhere, but there's like at least dozens, but probably hundreds of good options. The key is just like, it should be not too intense of an activity, because you're trying to actually create space for people to talk and be social and get, I would say, surface level connection. And if you have something that's too intense, you actually don't have enough capacity or space to get to that piece of it, right? So remember what you're trying to achieve, but like create that opportunity for fun. And that's where you're going to start getting those very first connections. And that establishes a little bit of humanization, that gets a little bit of warmth built in the group, so that people are ready for, I would say, the more impactful steps that come later, which is then you go into, I can't remember the phrase I used anymore, but
real talk.
Real talk. And so this one, is about starting to have those real conversations. The things that, in the past would be like, oh, you go with coworkers to the bar afterwards, maybe. And then like you get late into the night and you start getting into those deep conversations. And it's like, what are other ways that you can trigger that in a digital world, for everyone in a faster way? And so there is some really good activities that have come out. And again, there are now lots of these, but I think really one of the first ones is something called Ungame, which now has like 50 different variants that you can pick from. There's a few companies that will make you bespoke decks just for your company, so you can have it branded if you want. Shopify spins some of those off a few years ago. But the idea is basically you're trying to skip past small talk and straight into meaty topics. And so it's actually, for a lot of people that I've exposed this to have found it surprising, because like, that you can't just go straight to a question of like, what's the relationship with your mother? Right? Like that feels heavy. It might not be, but it might be. And it turns out that we have so few opportunities in our life these days to talk about these things, that when we're with people that we have some trust with, that we know aren't going to abuse the answer, aren't going to use it in a way to hurt us, but are going to hear us with care and intention, that it is like super, I think people are hungry to share those stories and those perspectives and showcase who they are, how they became who they are, what their history is and what their story is. And so that real talk is where you're using basically a few different things to prompt richer questions. Another one that I find really, really good, it takes a little bit of editorialization to work in a work context, but the New York Times has an article from like 5-6 years ago now called, I think, 36 Questions to Fall in Love. That one nicely cascades in intensity. So it starts lighter weight and gets more intense as you go, which actually sets it up really well for a team setting. If you basically just go through the questions in order, skipping the ones that don't quite translate into a work context. And after a couple of weeks of that, you'll come out the other end with people that have just such a different flavor of trust and safety and vulnerability and honesty with each other. And you can stop there, right? Like, honestly, if you go through that whole thing, you've built huge amounts of trust. And maybe before I get to the third one, I'll just like step back, and why this trust is so important is that it lets us not have to hold up all of these guards around us in everything that we do. It lets us just be honest. It lets us be authentic. It lets us challenge. It lets us raise novel or weird ideas that we might have without fear of how is that person going to react. Because if you can share a deeply personal story and see how the person responds with care and empathy, then like sharing a work thing is like, that's easy. That's inconsequential compared to the conversations that we've already had. And then really this third layer to me, or actually, I'll just go to the third layer and then we can like dig back into some of these. The third layer of like understanding the full human is one that I think when you have teams that are going to be together for a long time is really worth investing in. I also think this is something you can do in very specific circumstances to circumvent doing the first two layers and just immediately get to the heavy stuff. And so the reason I say that is like, there's a peer group that I'm part of in Toronto, where part of the training to be a part of this peer group, because the whole point of it is to talk about super confidential things, is you have to be in a room with 40 people you have never met and draw a life graph of your entire life.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's such a beautiful, and like doing this cold requires a certain kind of humans. So like you can't really just pull this out of nowhere with every team, but like, you know, your teams, be smart about it. You can either build up to it by doing those first two steps and then introduce the life graph. And in some circumstances, like this peer group where everyone's there because they want to have these deep connections of people that they can share very challenging things with, you kind of know that you're going to have something like this coming. But anyways, that life graph of draw your entire life as a graph, highs and lows, over like maybe 5-10 minutes, and then spend 10 to 15 minutes presenting it. It's such an impactful thing because it's compressed, but you get like this full story of who a person is and everything they've been through. And it can be so, it reminds so strongly how much all of us are humans with these unique and independent and often surprising journeys and stories in ways that when you only see your work persona, you forget about how much more there is behind that person.
I think it's such an important, aspect of just understanding the person and what they're going through. And then, there is this saying, like, you never know, like, what the person is struggling with, right? Whoever you are interacting with in your life. And that this kind of exercises allow you to actually see where the person is, what they are struggling with or struggled with. And then you can put a lot of their reactions, even and interactions, into context. They're like, they had, this in the past. That might be why they're reacting like that, not because, I don't know, they don't like me or something like that. So such a powerful exercise, the belief to understand the full human being.
And I think even for the individual doing it, like, because again, there's so, at least in the circles that I'm in, I find there's so few moments to be able to share a lot of this kind of stuff. There's so few people that, like, you get into a conversation, right? It's always about the weather or the surface level stuff. And it's very infrequent to get into these deep spaces. And it can be deeply, deeply cathartic to open up about these things and find people that have similar stories or journeys or arcs or moments in their lives that you can connect on, where it's a thing that just would never come up in quote unquote polite conversation. Go ahead. Yeah, no, it's magical. And I think every team I have run this with, the initial reaction was a little bit of terror, like, we're doing what? Right. And like the one important call out with this, right, is the fact that you're drawing your life graph is a really important piece of this, because you can leave stuff off that you're not ready or comfortable with sharing. And I think that's super critical with anything in these kinds of spaces, that people maintain full autonomy about how and when and where they open up.
It's like nobody's going to force you to write down or share everything that ever happened to you in your life. I think, this kind of exercises and also different questions, what they also are very good at is they can help to uncover people's motivations for work, right? And they can help to increase engagement. Like a lot of companies, team leaders, entrepreneurs, like they trying to figure out how to keep my people engaged, right? How to motivate them. But before you can motivate them, you actually need to understand them, like what drives those people, right? I believe those kind of exercises can really facilitate that, to understand your people and understand what drives them, and help them to bring those internal intrinsic motivations to the workplace, so they are engaged about the common goal.
Yes. And it opens them up to just bringing their full selves to the colloquial office every day in a way that is also engaging, because you're not having to leave parts of yourself behind, right? Being in a space, you spend almost a majority of your life with the people that you work with. How nourishing and exciting could it be to be in a place where you can just be you and not have to have a work you that's different than your home you. And like, there might always be a little bit of a delta there, depending on who you are and what you're comfortable with. But the less energy you have to put into guarding and projecting a very specific image of yourself, the more of that energy you can save for the things that you care about, for the work that you do, for the people that you interact with.
Letting those guards down, that actually frees up a lot of energy. As a brain coach, I always study this brain energetics, and they actually, neuroscience research shows the more inhibition you have to engage during your interactions, the less energy you're going to have for all the rest of cognitive work. And that's why, if you always feel like you have to hide a lot, that's you're not going to be your most productive or impactful self.
I love how you have that kind of like insight, right, about the brain psychology, and like how you can actually see physically in the brain that these guards and these inhibitions have a mental cost. And I'm curious, like, is there other things that you've seen in your own research and study and exploration here that maybe ties into some of this establishing of trust, being your authentic self, and how that changes to some extent, like the physical presence of the human?
Well, there is quite a lot, and I don't do research myself, but I study the research of other people. Trust has a lot to do, for example, with oxytocin, right? And when, for example, neuroscientists talk about trust, they always talk about oxytocin and all the practices that we as people can do to boost that oxytocin, and that increases trust. And sharing things that we care about, that builds it. But then also, they used to think that online communication doesn't boost your oxytocin that much, but actually then they measured it, and it was almost equal to in-person communication, but obviously only when you have this openness and you're willing to trust and to share. What I learned is this, trust, when you're building trust in relationship, it boosts oxytocin, and oxytocin is also very important for confidence, and confidence is very important driver of performance, right? When we are not confident, we are not going to be proposing ideas, we are not going to be innovative, we are not going to be, we're not even going to be that invested into our work, because we're always going to be doubting, is it the right thing? Is it the wrong thing? Am I in a safe place? And it just not feeling safe. It requires it drains your energy much more, because you're always maintaining this higher,
on this high guard at all times.
High guard, high arousal status, right? When the best state for productivity is being calm and alert. But you only can be calm when you feel safe, and you can only feel safe in a trusting environment, right? Just being like that all the time, that is not good for trust or productivity.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, the comment too on digital, I do find there a lot of people have this belief that you just can never build high trust through this forum, and it's it takes a little bit more work, right? And as you said, I think it's interesting that you can see studies around how if you set up the space correctly, it happens, but if you don't set up the space correctly, it doesn't, because you really can get that trust flowing once you get people bought into it with the right facilitation, the right expectation setting, the right activities to guide and drive the conversation in a way that is productive and engaging.
One more thing that I remembered, digital environment actually allows, compared to physical environment, create better even ground. What they found is trust is much stronger, and we just have more of it when we don't have hierarchy, right? When we don't feel like somebody is above, somebody is below. And in digital environment, it just happens so that it's easier to maintain. Where when we are on the Zoom and there are all this windows, it just feels much more even than when you, for example, you go and you see your boss or your leader or your manager, and in an actual office, and they're kind of at a pedestal, and here you don't have this thing.
I would say that's one of the things that I really love about the digital environment is it's so equalizing. I mean, there's right, you can't have as many people at the same time, but even in I would say workshop type meetings, right? Having everyone have to raise their hand instead of in office where you might just defer to the person with tenure or authority first. And everyone being the same size box with approximately the same size human does things, right? We forget about size and a whole bunch of these other interesting implicit biases that we pick up from a physical sense that start to disappear, right? There's lots of interesting studies around how height has an influence on power and dynamics in office. And we are all now the same, 1/3 of body on camera, and that kind of equalizes opportunity and perception in useful ways. I mean, there's other biases that come in the remote world we have to be careful about, right? I mean, I've put in a lot of work into my background and stuff like that, but it presents an opportunity to create a more even footing to build off of.
Yes.
And
yes.
On the digital thing too, I'm trying to find her name because I want to reference her. I'll find it in a bit. But there was someone I was at when I was at QCon. One of my fellow track presenters talked about how to do really good one-on-ones digitally. One of the things that I found it makes a lot of sense, but most interesting was how it's actually easier to get into deep and hard conversations digitally. Because most of the time we're not actually looking at each other's eyes. You're looking at your screen, and like the way our camera setups work, it's actually hard to look at your camera at the same time as looking at the screen. But that like subtle shift actually lowers the barrier to open up about heavy things. It's the same effect as you get when you're in a car sitting side by side instead of sitting face to face. And you can emulate again this in person by having your one-on-one in person, not facing each other. But there's something about that socially feels weird, and it comes kind of by default in the digital environment.
Yeah, I actually, I don't know where I read that, this confrontation, also position that not the best for collaboration in general. And so whenever I meet someone in person, even I try to sit at an angle. I try not to sit, confronting each other. And that actually works really, really well for the dynamic of conversation.
It's like one of those things where I think it makes sense when you hear it, because you're like, oh yeah, like there's more intensity when you're like across from each other. Like it feels like it's positioned to be something more, versus when you have the angle or the side by side. Interesting effects that come with this transition that even if you weren't intentional, you get benefits out of.
Yeah, and that actually another thing I wanted to mention about the depth of conversation. I think it might be also easier to facilitate in-depth conversation in this digital environment, because from, on one side, you have less clues to read the other person, but then on the other side, you are here for a reason. Like when you're in person, sometimes you just get carried away, or you might just, do something like, I don't know, in the environment, and you don't necessarily get into what you wanted to get into. Whereas when you, decided to have a Zoom call, like, why are we here? For a reason, not just open up and close it down. So I think that also can actually help to jump right into the meat of the conversation and interaction.
Yeah, for sure. And I think because if you've done this properly, you've set up the space with a specific purpose, you can also really help ground people. We have a natural human conversation is to build off of each other's answers and bounce back and forth. But that actually can sometimes take away from the trust building, because there's interesting biases that creep in when you're having certain kinds of sharing conversations where we'll all respond to the one popular person's answer with a build off, and then the unpopular person doesn't get the build off, and that shuts them down from sharing again in the future. And that's you should facilitate this properly in person to avoid that. But it's much easier to set the stage digitally that, hey, we're here together to share and be present and learn from each other. And so every time you give your answer alone is enough. You don't need to build off someone else's. And in fact, today you're not allowed to. And you can do that again in person. You should. But I think because there's a little bit of a reset with having to do this digitally, I think it is easier to introduce those kinds of interaction patterns in a digital environment, because it always feels awkward to not build off someone else's answer, but it feels even more awkward in person where we have all of this like social cue and physicality to it. And so you can, in the same way of like equalizing, you can create an even more equal opportunity for people to share their authentic stories without as much unintended judgment attached to it. Yeah,
I think what you are saying and what I'm hearing and thinking about, in digital environment, there are so many more opportunities to facilitate the interaction and to create different kind of stages and rules to set the stage for whatever interaction you'd like to see. And also it's so easy, to like change the background. I kind of did poor job today for the environment to really seeing myself. But you can change the color, you can change the background. You can also send people to breakout rooms, right? And have them discuss certain topics in like 2s or 3s. And but there is just so much variety that can be facilitated so much easier. And, I remember like a couple of days ago, I was talking to a developer and he was saying, he kind of misses those old days when you all, worked with people. And I'm like, but now you can and he's in New York. I'm like, no, you can talk to me, and I'm in Brazil, or you can talk to a person in Tokyo. When else in the world would you be able to do that? Right.
Yeah.
Now it's.
Yeah. there's so many, you have to find the tools, but there is really good tools available already that let you have some of the best parts of in-person, right? You can have pairing with anyone in your company, a flash notice with the right tool. You can hop on a call with people from all over the world, and we're now equalized, right? Back in the day of a lot of our, I think, unfortunate attempts at digital where it was mostly an office with a few remote people. Basically, the remote people just got the short end of the stick. And now everyone is kind of equalized. So it's not as, there's more opportunity for people to bring everything they have to the table. And we're also, in many ways, only at the start of this too, right? Like this is the worst version of the tools that we'll ever have from this point on. And I'm like super excited to see what kinds of new things get layered into this as we find what patterns work, what gaps there are, how we can equalize and simplify interaction and make this feel more personal or connected or dynamic.
Jason, now that we are talking about a lot about, we're talking about remote world of work and just remote, life and life with a lot of digital tools where we communicate in all these different ways. First part of the question, are there any interesting tools or technologies that you use at Shopify specifically, or maybe for your own work that you'd like to share with listeners who might not be aware of those?
There is, everything's basically just Google Meets for us, and Slack is a pretty big heavy piece. So nothing super rare. There's one that I just forgot the name of because I don't write code that much anymore. But I'll find it. You can just cut me searching. Tuple. Yeah. Tuple is phenomenal for pairing, mostly because the video quality is very crisp. And when you're sharing code, you need to be able to read the other person's screen really, really well. And you can get multiple people in there. You can share keyboard. Like it kind of basically, it's a better version of pairing in person at this point in time.
Tuple.
That's kind of, we also have like just in general, our dev tooling is very good. And so all of our dev tooling is now in the cloud, which is really helpful now in digital environments because you can send a link to someone to be able to access their entire dev environment running in effectively like production. And that is also super useful for collaborating digitally because you can now, it's useful for lots of different reasons, but further improving access to what's happening while something's being built out to more people where, we probably would have done this in person as well, but digitally it's basically required because you can't walk over to someone's laptop and help debug their computer. But now you can get a link and see what their thing is, pull down the exact same version on your own local copy and help figure it out, or hop on Tuple and like collaborate to figure it out together. We are, I think we're in early days of exploring other tools we can use. Slack has been good for collaboration, but it is very synchronous by nature. And I think we're experimenting with some new tools on more async communications.
Yeah, I think, a lot of, people are loving these days because they really allow you to get into your zone of focus and work on what you need to work on, and then, get out there and share when you're ready. On that topic, actually, a lot of our listeners probably would be curious to know about how do you optimize maybe a little bit, because we don't have a lot of time left, but how do you optimize for productivity maybe at Shopify? How do you keep people focused and then at the same time collaborating? Do you have any rules set up for that?
Yeah, the real answer is like we're big. And in many ways, the way we try to operate is by defaults. So we have lots of defaults, but the expectation is that as a team, do what's smart for you. So there isn't really like a universal rule. And I think that's good because I don't think you can pick a rule for whatever it is we are, like 10,000 people, that actually works in all of the contexts of all of the teams well. But we can give you a good default. Broadly, what I'll say that I really like about how we approach things. So we just, we've been doing a little press circuit around this, but we just canceled everyone's meetings at the start of the year as like a fresh start, right? Like just clear everyone's calendars, bring back what's important, bring back what's useful, but like do it with really high intention of what meetings have been serving me. I find this is a really common thing, particularly in Canadian culture. We're polite, but sometimes to a fault, where we will keep meetings going because we feel like we should, not because they're valuable to us, right? And that's the worst thing you can do with a meeting, is have it because it's there, not because it brings value. But we all fall trapped to that. And so like the company-wide wipe, I think is just a really good way to say, hey, like you can have meetings, but like make sure they're the ones that you want, that are useful to you, that let you collaborate in the right ways, that still serve you first and foremost. We have a meeting-free day to try and push against, like to make sure that we're protecting maker time. I think something we do, like we are a digital first company. That phrasing is very intentional. We still get people together in person. I actually am a deep believer that being remote doesn't mean that you never meet your people in person. There are so many things that you can accelerate in person from a trust building and relationship building and humanizing perspective, right? I mean, I write and I talk about all these things you can do in a digital space because I think you should, but I also think you should invest in bringing people together in person and doing some of that together in the same space. There's also certain kinds of workshops and activities and planning type things that just go faster in person than they do in the digital world. There's some that go faster digitally than they do in person. Use the right medium for the thing you're trying to achieve.
And I think, that actually circles back to your area of focus, intentionality, right? Just being intentional about like what you're trying to achieve, where you're trying to go, and what are the best tools for that. Like the best interactions.
And I think it's like, how do you build a productive team? Know what your team's trying to do. What are the types of rituals that they need? What are the types of practices? Is the work really well known, really well defined? You're going to set up very different systems for that. Is it completely vague and no one knows any of the details? You're going to approach that in a radically different way. And you should. And that's like all of these things that we do, all of these rituals, these practices, these techniques we talk about, none of them are a silver bullet that work in all cases. It's on you as a leader, as a team member, as a person present to think about, what am I trying to achieve? Which tool out of like the thousands available to me is going to help me get there fastest? And experiment with it too, right? Like I think that's maybe the one thing that we do keep true to heart across the company in Shopify. And I think a lot of companies, I would like to see more of this, is just willingness to experiment. You're going to get a lot of stuff wrong, and that's okay, because you're going to learn from it and you're going to figure out a better way to do it. And you're going to keep trying, and you're going to keep seeing what sticks, and you're going to see what worked. And then eventually it will not work for you anymore, and you'll find something new. That's okay. What served you 6 months ago doesn't necessarily serve you today.
And, because we were talking a lot about trust really helps that to create that culture where you can fail, you can experiment, and ultimately find what works. Right. And I think, concluding our episode, I want to talk a little bit about, intentionality in general for people's lives and work. Now it's January and we have like the whole year in front of us.
Yes.
And I think intentionality, it's just the most important thing. If you are intentional about what you want to create at the end of this year in your work and in your life, and if you get back to this intention every day, day after day, that will help you to make such a big progress on anything it is, you decide to do. This, intentionality, such an amazing concept. Thank you, Jesse, for focusing on that and bringing it up front and center, not just in people's life, but also in the workplace.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, I agree. I think this is like, the New Year's goal setting is sometimes a bit of a meme, but I really do think anything that's a good moment to help you be more intentional is great. And step back, figure out, what do you want to spend time on? What are you doing in your life that you're doing because you want to? What are you doing in your life because it's become an automatic motion? And not that all automatic motions are bad. In fact, I think our habits really define what our day-to-day is. But are you aware of your habits? Are they habits that serve you? Are they habits that you are proud of, that you like, that are bringing you to where you want to get?
Yes, thank you, for sharing this. I believe it's very important insight for everyone to take away. Like, your habits, whatever it is you do, is it serving you and what you're trying to achieve? Jesse, it was an amazing, insightful conversation. So many tools and strategies that people can just take and copy and paste and experiment and see what works for them. Thank you for sharing all of this. Is there anything else you would like to add? Maybe I, missed some questions. Maybe there is a question that you wish I'd ask, but I didn't. So is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think honestly, I kind of came in to see what would arrive very intentionally without an opinion of what we were going to talk about, just to be present in the moment. And I really enjoyed our conversation, where it took us, what kind of things came up. And yeah, I'm just excited to see what people might do with some of these approaches or these techniques, what kinds of things they'll discover as they reflect and think about what they want and what they're trying to achieve. And I'm excited to figure out, what I want to do this year and what kind of intentions I'll set for myself.
Yeah, aren't we all? And Jesse, the last piece, where can people connect with you, interact with you, or ask you questions about culture or intentions or, anything that comes to their mind? What are the best places?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not as active on there as I should be, but I generally pay attention. Twitter, if it wasn't collapsing right now, used to be one of the more go-to places, but I'm still kind of around on that. Email is the one that I will always respond to, which is, it's linked on my website, which is jcmcginnis.com. But
and I'm going to link all of this in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll say just reach out. I love talking about this kind of stuff. I think I find it so fun. I learn so much from every person I have a conversation with about what they're trying to solve and how they're approaching it and the circumstances. Like there's always something new to be gained. And so I really do love engaging and figuring these kinds of things out with people. So yeah.
Thank you, Jesse, for being so generous with your time and all the insights. And I highly encourage people to reach out and to ask your questions, to share opinions, to start intentional and meaningful conversations to learn from each other, right? To get better and see where life takes us. Thank you, Jesse.
Yes. All right. Thanks, Angela.